Now, the Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana, will tomorrow deliver his national budget speech in Parliament. It's expected that the minister will prioritise job creation initiatives, address global trade tensions, and outline government's plans to reduce the budget deficit and stabilise public debt. In his 2024 medium-term budget policy statement presented in October last year, the minister announced that the budget deficit for 2024-2025 increased by 34.7 billion compared with the 2024 budget, mainly due to weaker revenue performance. But to talk more about what we can expect in tomorrow's national budget speech, we're joined by Lerato Nkosi, who's a lecturer at the Department of Economics at UNISA, and Zimbali Mncube, a tax and budget policy researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice. Great to have both of you. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you, Leanne.
Lerato, let me begin with you. So, as I mentioned in his mid-term budget policy statement that back in 2024, the Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana, said that the economy was forecast to grow by an average of about 1.8% over the next 3 years. I mean, that underscores the need for continued implementation of structural reforms. Do you think we're still on course at this point?
Well, and you will remember, or rather, let me say that the statistics for Q4 of 2024 are not released yet, but we can infer from Q3 last year. What we saw, unfortunately, was a contraction of real GDP of 0.3%, and also a decline in your expenditures in your key sectors such as your transport and your agriculture. However, some positive sentiments can be drawn from your household expenditure, which was increasing, as well as your services industry, mostly your finance. So one would say that we can expect positive sentiments. 1.8% is not such a high economic growth rate to pursue.
It certainly isn't, and we always seem to be seeing that number adjusted. Zimbali, let me come to you. If you want to weigh in a little bit on the growth rate and whether we're on track or not, but also what I think people are really looking for is the issue of unemployment, job creation. None of this can be achieved if we do not grow this economy more.
Indeed, Leanne. I think we should look at the statistics outlined by Lerato, the revised outlook and contraction in key sectors of the economy against the fiscal strategy that the government has chosen to pursue. I think we've been in the public and we've emphasized that simply cutting the budget to stabilize debt will not result in any economic growth, but will instead shrink the size of government spending, which is a large component of GDP. And so will end up actually being counterproductive and not addressing the big issue that we want to address. But we also note that this outlook is very far off from what the president said in his SONA, which was a target of 3% by 2027. And so what we are expecting today is the minister to lay out a plan that will ensure that we reach this target by 2027. And I agree with you, and as many callers have emphasized, the issue of jobs and job creation is central to people's livelihoods. And I think what we're expecting is also an update of the plans that have been put forward to scale the public employment stimulus, as well as other public employment programs, which I think have provided over 2 million work opportunities for particularly young people who suffer the most in terms of unemployment in our country. And so we're looking forward to see what exactly will be put forward in terms of resourcing these key programs, alongside expanding the social relief of distress grant, which also plays its key role in ensuring that people can look for jobs and also support themselves.
Yeah, and it's a very difficult situation we find ourselves in, because there's, as we all very much so know, there's a very small tax base, a tax-paying personal income base here in South Africa. I mean, we can look at those numbers, but it is very, very small, and there's this expectation that the minister may expect major tax reforms when he tables this national budget. Does National Treasury have any other options than possibly increasing taxes? Because you even saw the SARS boss saying he doesn't think it's a good idea to touch taxes too much at this point in time. Lerato, let me come to you on that one.
You'll remember that last year in the 2024 MTPPS, the minister spoke a lot to your tax amendments, your tax acts, and even committing South Africa to the global minimum tax compliance. The minister also announced a under collection of 22 billion in tax revenue last year. So what we could expect is that because this is such a drainage from the economy, it should be compensated in future financial years. And that is what we should expect because of that huge under collection. But what I feel could be a good strategy is for the government to impose the global minimum tax requirement, especially on your big corporations, because you find across the world, across the globe, your big corporations such as your multinational corporations, your Nike, your McDonald's, and the like, they do not really conform, or rather, they choose the countries that have the lowest tax requirements. So that is one tax base in terms of corporate tax that the government could tap into, but definitely not tapping into your personal income tax, for instance.
Yeah, I'm not sure that South Africans can handle this. And I think most economists look in terms of, I mean, we're talking about I don't know, this is what's being reported on, a 300 billion rand shortfall. And the reality is that the minister has to find that and make this money up. And where most people agree is that they need to basically have a look and talk about a solution when it comes to cutting state spending. And that is where people see the solution, as opposed to, again, taking it and saying, okay, well, citizens, you must just pay more tax and we're going to increase everything to get that money back. Whereas most people, and I talk from the economic side, agree that it is actually lying within the state. It's overspending there. Talk to me about that, Zimbali. What are your views on this?
Yeah, no, I think most of the time we see that cutting expenditure is the low-hanging fruit. It's the easy thing to do, but oftentimes it's not weighed against the cost that it places on those who depend on public services, on those who cannot pay school fees, and on the elderly who depend on social grants and therefore have to be protected against the increasing cost of the food basket. And so when we propose solutions to help us address these issues, we need to go back to our constitution and ask ourselves, is the state pursuing its constitutional obligations if it cuts expenditure? And the answer is no, because the state has an obligation to ensure that everyone's rights, especially socioeconomic rights, are fulfilled. But in terms of resourcing, the state also has an obligation to put in place progressive measures to raise revenue. And I think that we haven't seen enough bold actions in this regard. We've proposed previously that we should be looking at taxing more in terms of the wealthy and high income earners. I think we all agree that to a certain extent, personal income tax will harm household and disposable income and savings. But I think it's important to recognize that not all households are the same in South Africa, and therefore there's still scope to tax the wealthy. We can raise up to 250 billion per year if we just cut the existing rebates for high income earners, and we think of introducing a special VAT, particularly on luxury goods that the wealthy purchase. And of course, there is the big question of implementing a wealth tax. The studies that have been conducted shows that a wealth tax of between 3 to 7% on the richest 1%, just 1% of our society, could raise up to 70 to 160 billion. And so this is a proposal that I think has not been sufficiently discussed within the cabinet and within this new GNU. And we're hoping that the new proposals to raise revenue do not necessarily harm the poor in a potential increase in the VAT, because we know that those who are low income earners spend most of their income and purchasing goods and services. And so a VAT would be regressive in that regard. But taxing wealth is an option that we still have.
Certainly, VAT is a big one. I mean, it moved to 15% in 2018, and as you say, this does affect the poorest of the poor, and I'm not sure that's a direction they can look at right now in terms of the state of South Africans. I want to come to you, Lerato, about this wealth tax, because that is something that has always been juggled about. There are those that are for it, and there are those that are absolutely against it. The arguments against it saying that, you know, the wealthy are already overtaxed. I mean, we've got about, 7.4 million individuals that pay tax at the moment, and they are literally looking after the country right now. And if you increase the taxes more on the wealthy, there's the chance you may lose them. They may leave the country. They may decide to sort of not work within the boundaries of what it is, and that's a big risk. What do you say? Because there are obviously those that are totally in favor of this wealth tax.
Leanne, I'm totally in favor of the wealth tax as well. If we say that the rich are the ones that are carrying the country, we must also take into consideration the middle class, that is the one that is suffering most. Because what the middle class is suffering from, and what the middle class is suffering from, is high personal income tax. And those taxes are not the same when you consider them for the wealthy and for those in the middle class and the lower income classes. And as far as your wealthy leaving the country, or us losing them to other nations or other economies, I don't think that's highly probable, because the wealthy have already invested a lot in this country. The fact that they own, that there are 1% that own almost 3/4 of the economy, shows that there are very good prospects for them in this country, and that they have a high incentive to continue to do so. So a wealth tax is definitely a good solution, and it could bring out a considerable amount of revenue collection, as Zimbali has noted.
I want to talk about our debt, because this is a big issue. And when we talk about the shortfall, which we've been trying to find a solution to during this interview and finding different avenues that the minister has. But I mean, one of the solutions is taking out more of a loan to try and work this down. However, the more loans we take, the more our debt to GDP is growing, and that's a big problem. I mean, if we just look at a number where it said as of 2024, our national government debt stands at $300.2 billion US. We know this number. This is such an increase, because if we look back to 2008, 2009, it was 23.6%. Now, 74.7%. Are you worried about this, Zimbali? Because, I mean, those numbers seem massive in terms of, can we afford to take out more loans?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's a worry that our debt costs have increased so much. And I think the biggest concern we should be looking at is the interest payments that we've been paying, where we are paying around 5% on public debt as a share of GDP, compared to upper middle income countries that pay around 2.2% and 1.8%. And so this drains the amount of resourcing that can be redirected towards the social wage or other key priorities that the government faces. But I think that we should look at other avenues of increasing the cost of debt before we can take on more debt. And I think the other question is, if we do take on debt, what is it used for? Because there are options where you take on debt and you invest it into infrastructure. You target particular key sectors of the economy that can absorb jobs and create employment. And in that way, the debt can pay for itself, you know. You look at potentially expanding income support, which is going to be also be spent in the economy when people buy goods and services. And I think we should look at debt in that way. How can we use it to actually play a role in supporting growth outcomes? And I think we should also, beyond proposals such as a fiscal rule or a numerical target that we should aim for in terms of our debt, we should also look at capital management techniques, such as imposing capital controls in order to ensure that there is no movement of speculative capital flows. We should also look at the role of the Reserve Bank in actually intervening in reducing the cost of government bonds.
Okay.
Right. As well as trying to target development financial institutions in supporting growth in the economy.
All right, I have to leave it there. I don't know where time's gone, but thank you so much. And that's just sort of drinking the foam off your cappuccino, because there's so much more to get through. And believe me, throughout the day here on Morning Live, well, not on Morning Live, on SABC News, we'll continue to take a look at the budget and what we can expect. And then, of course, that happens tomorrow. Lerato Nkosi, lecturer at the Department of Economics at UNISA, and Zimbali Mncube, a tax and budget policy researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice.